We are here with Jerry Gidel to talk about the choppy market and the Pro Farmer Tour, right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, what's going on with the markets and what do you see over the Pro Farmer Tour?
Well, kind of finishing up for late last week, and we've had such a tough time to get together here this week, primarily because I went out to see Susan's, my wife's county fair, and I've been going to that fair for 20 years, so it's kind of my county fair too. From that standpoint, the weather was reasonable there, but it's really starting to crank up this week, to say the least. And I think that was what was giving us the push in the prices last week as we went into the weekend. In that, right now, at least, it looks like the forecast for the Illinois here in Indiana and the central part of the U.S. is going to get quite interesting, to say the least, in the Wednesday, Thursday period. I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, depends on what perspective you have. If you're right now, the temperatures have got higher than expected on the forecast for last week, but it's right now, at least, it's going to last Wednesday, Thursday. So we haven't had 100-degree temps in Chicago since 2012. That's a long, long time. And that's what they're forecasting tonight, for tomorrow and Thursday. From there, with heat indices in the 110 or above area because of the humidity, that's not great weather. Now, the interesting thing is it's not going to last. They're talking about a backdoor cold front coming in on Friday, and then maybe even some high 70 temperatures here on the weekend. So that's a pretty dramatic setback. I don't know how much rain we'll get out of it. You'd expect we should get some. But the interesting thing about it is that the Eastern Corn Belt seems to, by the logic at this point, that's going to end up, keeping things together here in the U.S. Yields at this point. But definitely corn and soybean yields are going to be watched closely, as we just talked about. The Pro Farmer Tour is out there this week, and we'll get more news about that tonight.
All right. Thank you very much.
Well, let's take a quick peek at what we already have, and then we'll go ahead and sign out tonight. But it turns out that the numbers they came up with for South Dakota and in some early numbers in the Nebraska in the northern areas were pretty good comparison to last year. That was an area that really got hit last year with some very hefty drought and heat situations, and that and it's interestingly enough, it didn't ding so much of Iowa. It dinged up some things in Minnesota. So that's going to be watching very closely from there. But I've heard from reports off today's leg of the tour that went from Norfolk over to Nebraska City, which is like west central all the way over to south of Omaha, and that things were a lot tougher in that part of the world. We'll see what they come up with for a Nebraska yield. The USDA is already projecting something lower than they've kind of had over the years here. They've had some opportunities for 190 out there when the dry land's been good. But I don't know that we're going to see that this year. Last year was even worse. So, it might be better than last year, but it still might not be anywhere close to record yields in Nebraska. Similar situation, Ohio's yield were solid. They were somewhat near a couple years ago's prospects on the 180s type of number out there. Indiana, I heard a little more squeaking about things not being as high as they thought. USDA has a very impressive 190 yield out there for 191, I think, even for the Indiana crop, and maybe even they're a record at this point. I think that one could be interesting when they come up with those numbers. By the way, they were in Indianapolis last night. They're going to stop in Bloomington, Illinois, and our old stopping grounds down there, and that we won't get an Illinois number until tomorrow night, because they still have to do the western half of the state and get out into the eastern Iowa and Iowa City before they get those data together. But that's going to be that's today's Indiana number and Illinois' number for tomorrow, I think, are going to be quite important in determining if this year's U.S. yield average is going to end up being above 175. That would be a record. It doesn't have to be 178, doesn't have to be 177. 175, we've never had an average number in the U.S. Above 175, and the USDA is at 175 right now. We'll see what that turns out to be in the September report, but definitely a big important thing. We'll be watching these numbers indeed tonight. Weather-wise, as I said, the impact of this heat likely is going to be a lot more impactful on the soybeans, and that it could even prompt some of these plants out here to maybe even drop a few pods in some cases. But there's been decent moisture around, so it's going to be tricky as to how much of that. The pod counts that we've been getting from the tour have been respectable. I wouldn't. Pod counts are always difficult because there's so much can happen between a pod coming on, how many seeds are in it, how many actual pods make it to the end. But in general, it looks like it's going to be a chance for something about last year's 49.7 bushel U.S. yield. From there, the USDA's is below 51 here on their numbers at this point, so that's going to be quite important looking at those data. But right now, we'll see what tonight's numbers have to say from our friends at ProFarmer, and we'll have more things to discuss later this week when we get a chance to see their finalized numbers from basically Ohio all the way through to Rochester, Minnesota, and from South Dakota all the way around back up to Rochester themselves. So this is always probably the best opportunity to get a sense of where we can at. Now, it doesn't mean weather can improve or improve or lessen the yield at the end of the year, but it's a great great starting point at this point. So let's all keep an eye to the wire services about what the what the ProFarmer people come up with for their average, because there's 100+ people out there taking samples all over across the U.S., and I think they'll be probably close to 3,000. I think, but I'm not sure. It's a bunch. There's all kinds of samples that they take, a lot more even you and I did 10 days ago.
All right. Great to talk to you. Thank you, Jerry.
Hang in there, and hope we're feeling better. Bye-bye.